Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you to host. I really admire what your agency accomplishes, and I hope you all know that. My biggest fear as a member of this body is that we will succeed in the Mayor's House 1000 initiative, but we will fail on one of two other fronts, which is either supporting people who receive shelter but not housing in that process, and then fail ultimately to be housed, or failing to prevent a tidal wave of evictions that drives an equal or greater number of families into homelessness. And I have to say that this doesn't read to me like an emergency budget, and I don't mean that as a criticism of the agency, because you all are just distributing funds within a limited bucket. When I look at slide 4, I see the same number of unhoused households being served in 2023 and 2024, which makes me worry that we're just shifting to serving more unsheltered homeless folks and not people that are unhoused but not visible. And also per slide 4, we're hoping, with state and federal funding, we're hoping to build or preserve 3,000 units a year for 4 years, so up to 12,000. The gap is already 60,000. I don't see how nonprofit and private development will fill that gap, and moreover, 73% of our spending is continuing to go to shelter, which is not housing, and which we emphasized in our council letter, that we want to see investment in housing. My colleagues have already raised the gap in rental assistance, so I won't belabor that, but I've seen the math on the $55 million. It's solid. It comes from the partner that distributes that rental assistance and created that model. And either way, $7.2 million is not even the $21 million that we just heard from Angie. 1,200 evictions were filed in August. So I feel like this is a status quo budget book in terms of the balance between agencies, with 37% of that pie going to one agency, and hosted a very small overall portion. If we're going to solve our housing crisis, we have to sacrifice other priorities that are not as existential for our city within other departments. And I've heard you speak eloquently about that, so I know you understand that, and I'm disappointed about the host's overall share of the pie in this budget. So my two questions are, is it your goal to close the entire 60,000 unit gap? And if so, what are you hoping will fill that gap beyond these 12,000 units over 4 years? And also, what is the breakdown of the $12.6 million for rental assistance? I'm wondering if all of that is actually funding out the door, if any of that goes for staff, and I'm curious about the explanation of the $21 million that Host is calculating as needed versus the $55 million calculated by Colorado Eviction Defense Project. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Councilwoman. We can start with Sue or Mayor Johnston if you'd like to field that question, those two questions.
Yeah, happy to look at those. Thank you, Councilwoman, and share your urgency on the gap of the 50,000 units. Those numbers I've looked at as well directly. I think the path is to do 25,000 units over 8 years, which would close half of the gap. Obviously, that's 3,000 units a year, as you described. Keep in mind, that's about 3 times the volume of units we've done previously. And so it's a combination of what is possible and how fast we can do it. So this does represent, in our mind, a historic expansion of that commitment. And I think the numbers that are also helpful will be in the appendix around what the current cost per unit is to bring units on. And so I think that is around slide 31 total in mine, 31 or 32 in yours, which is, this is the math we're trying to balance against in terms of what it costs to bring on an affordable unit, which can be somewhere from, so when we look at the $100 million we're committing to this project of affordable units, that includes around $20 to $30 million of Prop 123 funds. That $100 million gets you to around 3,000 units a year, with the weighted average being around $30,000 per unit. You'll see both per unit of affordable rental housing is 15 to 35. Per unit of supportive housing is closer to 45,000, given the wraparound services. So that's the delta we're trying to hit. And so this is a matter of the most aggressive strategy we can pursue to meet that number. I would love to get to 50,000. I think one of the things this will raise is, do we have to look at other long-term structural changes like new bonds or new financing structures to be able to meet that entire gap? I think what we've tried to do is create a plan with current city resources to get a 3 times expansion of our current goal, with a plan to close half the gap in 8 years. But we're very open to creative ways to try to close the full gap, because I know that is the full need, and that same number gives me heartbreak as it does for you.
The other way is the other agency budgets. I'll just put that out there.
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about those when we get to them too. I think the challenge is the numbers there are quite large on a $1.7 billion budget. To add another $200 million would be roughly a 20% cut to all other budgets, that would be a dramatic change on other city services. And so willing to have all those conversations, but that is the same. I'm struggling with the same math that you are.
All
And
right, thank you.
Councilwoman,
Oh,
I
go
would
ahead.
just add that we hear your request for the additional information on the amount within temporary rent and utility assistance that goes to rent and utility assistance versus the amount for administration. So we can certainly provide that as one of our follow-up items. The other piece that I will acknowledge is that we are working on just a couple of updates to our metrics for the October book, specifically to make sure that the 350 estimated additional households that can be served with the $7 million in rapid rehousing are reflected in there. So just to acknowledge that we're working on an update to make sure that's included.
Thank you.